So we got a big problem here. There has been a powerful explosion at a factory in Russia that produces nuclear weapons deployment systems. This explosion looks like something out of a sci-fi film. I'm going to show you the footage in just a moment, but what's concerning is the Russian response to this, and they're being eerily quiet about it, and I'm going to talk about why that's problematic. On the same day, Putin has canceled his trip to Turkey. This would have brought him for the first time into a NATO nation in years. I'm not at all surprised that he declined to participate, considering all the two-faced deals that Turkey is involved with, and of course their warehousing of U.S. nuclear weapons. I'm surprised that he even considered the invitation at all. So it's been deferred. The U.S. is preparing to ship intermediate-range missiles to Europe after, of course, the abandonment of the INF Treaty in 2019. Most people don't know, but this is really the basis for the Ukraine war. This is the reason why the Ukraine war is being fought. The threat of deployment of these missile systems into Europe, and it now appears that the U.S. is going to push ahead with it, and Russia is responding. We are so close. Every day I report this stuff, we just get closer and closer and closer. I mean, everything right now comes down to what's going to come out of this Tucker Carlson versus Putin thing. Really, that's what the whole thing rides on at this point. One interview. It's absolutely insane. Putin is going to be addressing the Federal Assembly on February 27th. This is like their annual State of the Union address. I do believe that this year it is going to be a bit of a rallying cry for further mobilization. A Chinese spy, but they're not calling him that, was caught stealing nuclear secrets, and not just, run-of-the-mill stuff. This is very serious nuclear secrets. I believe this happened in California, so let the conspiracies run wild. But I tell you, man, this story is absolutely crazy because it's not being publicized in many places, but it is the 100% real deal. The U.S. is moving miles from mainland China. They're moving and deploying Green Berets to that region to train Taiwanese forces. I didn't even know that Taiwan administrated an island that is so close to the Chinese mainland. I'll show you on our interactive map here in just a moment. We have North Korea giving Israel the middle finger. I guess you can do that when you have nuclear weapons and you've already been sanctioned in more ways than one, in more ways that you possibly can be sanctioned. Medvedev has threatened nuclear war again in response to any conventional attack on their country, but this time it was a far more somber threat. It wasn't his usual trolling self. This one was concerning. Poland is claiming that Russia is in fact provoking them, okay? They're claiming that this whole thing with the air alerts and the Suwalki corridor and the missile that flew in there that they almost intercepted yesterday, that this is all about Russian provocation. Now, most people don't realize, and I just caught wind of this, there's another major NATO exercise that's going to be running simultaneously to Steadfast Defender, which is 90,000 plus military inside Poland. This one is going to be 20,000 in the Baltic states and the Scandinavian countries. So Norway, Sweden, Finland, 20,000 troops. It's going to be happening on March 5th. So think about everything that's about to go down here, okay? So you're going to have the biggest NATO exercises running simultaneously. Finland has closed its borders. They're basically getting ready to suspend all diplomacy with Russia. They're now having 20,000 troops do an exercise near the Russian border, okay? You have the Russian election coming. You have this address. You have this Putin-Tucker interview. You have everything that's going on in the Middle East. You have Ukraine about to push through one of the most draconian mobilization laws I think the world has ever seen since World War II, that is. And wait till I tell you about some of the perks that they're offering people. And it involves freezing your sperm if you die on the front lines, but there's a catch. They're only going to hold it for so long. So you better make sure that your family has a good line of credit. A U.S. embassy in Iraq has been completely surrounded by protesters. Hell is breaking loose in the Middle East. Hell is breaking loose absolutely everywhere. We got to talk about this explosion, okay? Now, the Ukrainian media is not accepting responsibility for this. The Ukrainian government, I should say. Typically, they accept responsibility for the drone strikes, not so much for the acts of sabotage behind enemy lines. As far as we know, this wasn't a drone strike, although it could have been. When I show you it on the map, it's located about 1,300 kilometers from the Ukrainian border, which is within the range of Ukrainian drones. They're new drones and possibly drones that we don't even know exist yet. And what's concerning about this is that the Russians are trying to say that what I'm about to show you was a pre-planned test, okay? Now, if this was a pre-planned test, why is the entire city that surrounded this explosion completely freaked out about it? Isn't this something that you should notify people of in advance, especially in light of the fact that you're in a war and your critical infrastructure is being targeted day after day? I mean, take a look at this explosion. I mean, this is absolutely crazy, okay? You can see how far it is off in the distance, miles away, but it is illuminating the entire skyline. And it's just this persistent fire, this persistent explosion. And so the Russians are saying that this was a planned test of some missile system. But I don't know. I mean, this, I think you have to be very naive to believe that in light of the fact that they didn't alert the community ahead of time. This looks like something else. Now, if Ukrainian saboteurs are messing, and that's an explosion, man. You can see the mushroom type cloud. It's not a nuke, but it's an explosion. And if the Ukrainians are targeting Russia's nuclear triad, you see, I've just already become desensitized to attacks on Russia's nuclear triad. That's how crazy this is. It's not Ukraine, it's NATO, okay? NATO is utilizing Ukraine to do this because ultimately NATO's stated goal is to, well, not officially, but many, presidents and prime ministers have said the quiet part out loud that they wish for Russia's strategic defeat and Putin's demise. So they want to do a decapitation strike on Russia. So the more these things happen, the closer we get. Now, the fact that the Russians are being quiet about it is the scariest part, because they must know what the inevitable conclusion is going to be, and they just don't want to spook the population. They know that invariably we're heading towards a nuclear altercation with NATO, so why even spook the population with this stuff? Just stay the course. Don't let these tactical losses derail the greater strategic objective, whatever that might be. The problem is, the more of these attacks, day after day after day, eventually it is going to wear down on a nation that is already one of the most heavily sanctioned and shunned and alienated on Earth. And I just suspect that they're being quiet about this because they know that there's a much bigger war coming, and they're trying not to call attention to it. This does not happen, okay? It does not happen in the frequency and intensity that it's been happening for the last 2 years. I've shown graphs on the channel before that show the several 100% increase in industrial fire activity since the war started. I don't think it's a short staffing issue. I think it's more the result of sabotage. Okay? This is one guy who's totally freaked out when he sees this. I mean, could you imagine knowing that that's a nuclear facility that makes deployment systems, and you see that? People are freaking out. So it's crazy, man. It's crazy. It's very, very intense. There's several video clips of this. Here's another one from... I'll give you some volume here on this one. Obviously some kind of jet fuel. Imagine how freaky that would be. Okay, so Putin decided to cancel his trip on the same day that that event took place. And I will show you exactly where that took place. So that was deep in Russia, just not too far from the border of Kazakhstan. Okay, so this is where that took place, I believe. Actually, no, that is not where it took place. I might have removed the marker from here, and it looks like I did. How embarrassing. Oh, no, here it is. It's way up here. All right. Yeah, so it's a fairly populated region by the looks of things. And you can see the distance is around 1,500 kilometers, okay? So, oops, what do we got going on here? Right there. Okay, so yeah, it's a fairly good distance. It's about the same distance, maybe a little bit further than St. Petersburg from Ukraine. So if this was done, this possibly was an act of sabotage. I do not think that this is an accident. I think that this is, and that's terrifying that they're pushing the Russians to that extent. So it's really a question of who is provoking who. Who do you trust? Who do you believe? Right now, the Russians are vowing a response to NATO's military buildup near the border. As I said, there's going to be 20,000 troops from 14 countries participating in drills in northern parts of Norway, Finland, and Sweden, and that is going to be taking place on March 5th, okay? So there's just going to be the convergence of so many different events around that period of time that I'm going to be very surprised if the markets don't crash. But like I was saying yesterday, it's going to take anything short of a nuclear explosion is not going to disrupt the markets. In fact, I would say that if NATO declared war on Russia, there'd probably be a market rally because people are so trained to think that right when crisis comes, the Fed's going to start printing money again. And that's when the retail or maybe the Fed will throw us some stimulus checks. One last hurrah before the ship sinks. Now, what should we talk about next? I mean, that is deadly serious. Just to give you some perspective on what they're manufacturing there. And remember, the Russians are saying that this was a planned event, not an emergency. They're producing artillery missiles, in particular strategic ballistic missiles for the Topol M and Iskander complexes, which are nuclear-capable complexes, and a variety of different nuclear components. They had 19 state contracts, that facility, with nuclear weapons component manufacturers. So, and there's also a testing ground on the plant. But that doesn't look like a test. And again, if it was a test, why wouldn't you inform the people there? Either way, you know, things are not looking good. As previously indicated with respect to this, Zakharova, the Russian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, is warning of potential escalation due to this Euro-Arctic region military activity that is going to coincide with the Steadfast Defender exercise. Medvedev said today that if World War III occurs, it will not follow the scenario of special military operation, meaning a limited conventional trench warfare, meaning that the conflict will not take place in the trenches with the use of armored vehicles and electronic warfare systems. And he chalks this up to the incomparability of our military potentials. He claims that Russia simply won't have a choice because it won't have the capability to fight NATO conventionally. Although some people would disagree, because again, NATO's military, NATO is a coalition. So as such, it's a fragmented collection of various different militaries who are to some degree or another interoperable, but they all speak different languages. They have different cultures. They probably have different control schemes and different control structures and ranking systems. And while there is that interoperability and there is the United States, which is kind of the binding factor amongst all of them, getting them to muster and come to the aid of any one country will be like herding cats, to put it lightly. So he says that the answer will be asymmetrical to protect the territorial integrity of our country. Ballistic and cruise missiles with special warheads will be used. This is based on our doctrinal military documents and is well known to everybody. And he's referring, of course, to the nuclear doctrine that states that they can and will use nuclear weapons even if they're only attacked utilizing conventional weapons, if those conventional weapons happen to target places of strategic interest which might compromise their existence. And he concluded that this is a very notorious apocalypse, which will lead to the end of everything. Putin has canceled his February 12th trip to Turkey for undisclosed reasons. He's saying that preparations are ongoing and a new date will be set. Well, I'm very doubtful of that in light of everything that's going on with respect to Turkey building various weapons manufacturing facilities inside Ukraine. I mean, that just doesn't add up. Maybe they're trying to see what the result of this Tucker Carlson thing is going to be, but it looks like they might throw Tucker under the bus and he might be the next Snowden. Russia simply does not trust the United States, okay? So, according to the Russians, they claim that the U.S. is planning on supplying the Allies with precision strike missiles, the Allies being Europe, of course, with a reported range of 500 to 5,000 kilometers. Now, this Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty that was suspended in 2019, this was one of the primary reasons why Ukraine and Russia went to war in the first place, because the risk, of course, is deploying these missile systems not only there, they can be deployed in the Baltics, they can be deployed in Finland, and the whole reason why they scrapped these in the first place was because you run the risk of not having enough time to respond. And the problem is that if you're shooting one of these missiles, you don't know if it has a nuclear warhead on it or not. Whereas if you're shooting an ICBM, well, it's pretty obvious. But if you're shooting one of these intermediate range missiles, it could very well have a nuke on it. And the problem is that the other side could misinterpret that. Even though there's a conventional warhead on it, there could actually be a nuke, so they might respond with a nuke attack, which of course would be a massive escalation. So this is why they wanted to get rid of these. I believe it was in the early 90s. And unfortunately, that has been scrapped. All of the nuclear treaties are basically now defunct or void. So the moratorium on these ground-based systems is no more, and Russia is protesting this. This is just yet another box that is about to get checked in the run-up to Cold War. I would say warm war, because we're in a state of war. Unlike the Cold War, we were never in this kind of war, even though the actual amount of military forces were much greater than they were today. Now, Poland is saying that Russia is in fact trying to provoke them, okay? Now, according to, where is this guy here? Let me see if I can find him. Not that guy, this guy here. Putin will declare that NATO entered the war. According to this military expert, Oleg Zhdanov, military expert, if NATO shoots down a Russian missile, Putin will declare that NATO has entered the war, and that this is what Russia is looking for. So what they're claiming is that this missile that almost went into Poland yesterday was intentionally aimed and had the trajectory towards Poland so that the jets would get scrambled and that they might shoot at it, and then the missile obviously changed its course at the last minute because they were hoping, or the Russians were hoping, that the Poles would shoot it and then they could say, hey, you know, because of this whole plane incident. So both sides are saying the same thing. Both sides are accusing one another. And no matter which side you're on, know that that means that we're entering in a greater phase of escalation. And we're right now at the crossroads of NATO finally potentially engaging the Russians, not just the Russians shooting down drones or bringing down drones over the Black Sea, but actual targeting of missiles with anti-missile systems, okay? So he claims that their reasons for doing this are as follows. If NATO shoots down a missile, Putin will declare that NATO has entered the war. Russia will consider that they've accepted a combat encounter. This is why partner countries, especially NATO members, are begging us not to use their weapons against Russia on its territory. Well, it's too late because you kind of just shot down a plane with a Patriot missile in NATO radar. Because the Russian Federation will consider this a direct combat clash with NATO and that NATO has officially entered the war, then, according to him, the war automatically becomes global. and that this is exactly what Putin wants to achieve. If the war is global, if NATO enters the war, according to Russia, then with whom will Putin's negotiations be? They won't be with President Zelensky anymore, and instead will be with Biden, Macron, Scholz, and Sunak. That is, with the persons of NATO member countries. This is what he wants to achieve. So this guy claims. I guess we'll find out in the not-so-distant future. So Putin may announce a message to the Federal Assembly on February 27th or 28th. Is it just going to be the run-of-the-mill patriotic message, or is it going to set the foundation for a greater call to arms and call to mobilization? It is quite possible. UN chief says that the world is entering an age of chaos. What a thing for the UN chief to say. He's not wrong. That's the problem. Now this one is crazy. Engineer steals US nuclear secrets worth millions. It's not that they're worth millions. It's just that this is a massive national security issue if there ever was one. Get a load of this. Okay, so an engineer employed by a California company stole trade secrets involving nuclear launch detection and tracking, federal officials say. An engineer faces a charge of stealing nuclear trade secrets from his employer in California. The 57-year-old San Jose man, well, he wasn't in fact just a San Jose man, he was in fact born in China, but became a U.S. citizen in 2011. Okay. Has in the past sought to provide the People's Republic of China with information to aid its military, U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada said in the release, yet this is receiving no attention whatsoever. So basically, the stolen files included blueprints for sophisticated infrared sensors designed for use in space-based laser systems to detect nuclear missile launches and track ballistic and hypersonic missiles. What did Castle Bravo just say in the interview just a couple days ago? He was talking about this very thing. This is the Star Wars program or post-Star Wars program. This is serious stuff. He also stole blueprints for sensors designed to enable U.S. military aircraft to detect incoming heat-seeking missiles and take countermeasures, including jamming the missile's infrared tracking ability, prosecutors said. So how crazy is that? And of course, we all know about the current border crisis. And I'm not trying to be xenophobic or anything, but it's just the truth. I mean, the U.S. is a fragile glass house, and it is so susceptible to outside influence, manipulation, and sabotage that I think when things really start to heat up, it's going to get absolutely crazy, okay? Because they're going to have to lock things down. Think about how open and free, not just the borders are, but just everything in general. I mean, sure, there's a lot of surveillance, but it would not be hard to mess with America's critical infrastructure, especially when it's been researched and studied. And we know that if you bring down a handful of transformers, the entire grid goes down. You don't think that that combined with cyber attacks, combined with attacks on satellites, that's going to be the first thing that happens in the run-up to a massive war? Man, it's going to be an interesting year, to say the least. Okay, so get a load of this. The Ukrainian parliament has passed a new bill, okay, that is going to basically allow them to mobilize anybody with 2 feet and a heartbeat. And the bill is reading as follows. Conscription age is going to be reduced from 27 to 25 years. I find it difficult to believe that they're not already mobilizing people under 25. But now it's going to be official. All persons liable for military service from 18 to 60 are required to register electronic conscript offices to which electronic summons will be sent. If citizens liable for military service fail to appear at the relevant authorities, their bank accounts will be blocked and their driver's license will be revoked. Ukrainian citizens abroad will be limited in the provision of any consular services without presenting a military ID or the registration documents. Recall, Kiev has been trying to get all of their draft dodgers repatriated so that they can send them off to die on the front lines. Tighter army mobilization rules, freezing banks, freezing assets, not being able to buy things, not being able to use your credit cards. You're basically cut off of society. You're basically cut off all of the systems that are needed to sustain life in the modern day. But don't worry, because they're going to make it worth it. Ukrainian personnel who died in the war will be able to become parents after death. Isn't that great? The Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine has passed a bill that will allow, I'm sure that's something like their parliament equivalent, storing frozen reproductive cells of deceased Ukrainian military personnel for 3 years. After this period expires, the storage of cells can be extended at the expense of somebody else. So you get 3 years because sperm have to be kept very cold. I think something like down to minus 196 degrees Celsius for them to actually still be usable. So that's pretty crazy, man. Talk about draconian, because how many people are really gonna go through that, you know? I mean, and then you're gonna have a bunch of single mothers, and it's just what a crazy world we're living in, guys. Absolutely crazy. I can't believe it. Now, in terms of what the US is up to abroad, what aren't we up to abroad? Did you guys know, I'm sure some of you did, that Taiwan oversees this island? Okay, so here's Taiwan, obviously, but that's not where Taiwan ends. In fact, there's these things called the Kinmen Islands that Taiwan also controls, and they're literally right off the coast of China, like 10 miles from China, essentially. And they're actually sending Marines here, not Marines, Green Berets, Special Forces, are going to be sent there in order to train Taiwanese forces. Now, some people are thinking that these are serving the same purpose as the troops in Iraq and Syria, in that they're a bit of a tripwire of sorts, put there as bait, as an excuse for further military mobilization within the region. It's hard to say, but regardless, we're doing it. We're going to go to war on all these three fronts at the same time. Think about the hubris of all of that. That is absolutely crazy. That's what you call a civilization in its death throes. We'll do crazy stuff. North Korea, the leader's sister, has said to Israel, "You savages, you are just puppets in the hands of the Americans." Savages. And basically, some people think that she is the power behind the throne there. One look at this woman, and I would have to agree. She probably is calling the shots in some way, shape, or form. But we're just seeing the division between East and West becoming more concrete by the day. And you know, we're already at that point where North Korea, Iran, and Russia, 2 years ago, it was debatable as to whether or not they were cooperating militarily, strategically. Now it's just, it's open secret, right? Iraq's U.S. Embassy has seen growing protests. I think I might have a video of that as well. So people are protesting there as in response to a high-level Hezbollah commander that was targeted inside Iraq recently. So people are not happy about that. There are calls from militia groups in the country for people to mobilize and storm that embassy. So they've closed all of the access routes into the international green zone within that region. So the shit's hitting the fan in the Middle East as well. As previously indicated, the UN chief has indicated that the world is entering an age of chaos. Just entering an age of chaos. It appears as though the farmers got their way in Europe. And as you know, I understand their grievances, but I'm also very concerned that it's going to backfire for numerous reasons. I don't think, I always say to people, just because you don't like the medicine or just because you don't like the prescription doesn't mean the illness isn't real. So we need to understand that if they're taking such extreme measures, there's probably a reason for it. Now, it might be strictly draconian, but I have a feeling that we're going to look back in a few years and we're going to say, oh, you know, and that this is when the government is going to say, well, we tried to warn you, or, you know, we tried to do something about it and shit got out of hand. So, I mean, there's so many levels to that debate that it's probably not a good idea to start talking about it at the tail end of a daily update video. But let's just leave it at that. Just know that sparks are flying everywhere, and it's only probably going to get worse. Not probably, it's definitely going to get worse. So keep on prepping, folks. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.